The End of Eternity by Isaac Asimov, published in 1955, follows a man named Harlan who has been plucked from reality as we know it, recruited into a mysterious, secretive, elusive organisation known as Eternity, who are responsible for monitoring time to prevent cataclysmic events from occurring. At the beginning of the book, Harlan is an observer, I think is his role, and he is responsible for detecting these events before they happen and calculating ways to prevent them. He is so good at his job and has such an instinct for this work that he is promoted to the role of technician. Now, technicians are the individuals who are actually responsible for travelling to the various centuries using a device called a kettle to enact these changes to alter the course of the timeline. Eternity's stance is that it is preferable to make the minimum necessary change, referred to with the acronym of MNC, which could be something as simple as moving a pot on a shelf to achieve the optimal outcome. And there are a lot of these kind of acronyms and terminologies in the book that make it feel quite a lot like a workplace drama, which does sound a little bit dull, but I think that through this, Asimov actually creates a believable organisation. This concept of going into the past or the future and making changes is kind of getting into the concept of the butterfly effect and causal loops and paradoxes, where even the smallest change can have enormous and far-reaching consequences, which is something that has obviously been explored in fiction many times, but I think that this is one of the earliest novels to do so. At first, the plot kind of made me think about the film The Adjustment Bureau, which is actually based on a Philip K. Dick story from 1954, which I think is called Adjustment Team. But I looked into where this concept first popped up in fiction, and I think that it might have been from a Ray Bradbury short story which was published in 1952. Getting back into the narrative for a second, Harlan's promotion annoys his superior, who sets about trying to sabotage him. The way that he goes about this is to recruit a female secretary who he then assigns Harlan to live with. And some of you are probably rolling your eyes at this plot point, an attractive female secretary being the undoing of a male protagonist in a classic science fiction novel. But Asimov does actually end up subverting some of that cliche and narrowly avoids stepping on rakes, I think. This arrangement is particularly difficult for Harlan because, for some convenient reason that I forget, women are not really present in Eternity, which means that he inevitably becomes infatuated with her. This leads to a situation where he needs to consider what he's willing to sacrifice for this newfound love, and is he willing to bring about the end of Eternity. I think that this book sets up a really intriguing plot early on, making really good use of what has become an overly familiar trope, where there are some genuinely compelling mysteries and questions that arise, such as the presence of a number of hidden centuries that are inaccessible to humanity through the use of this time travel technology, and the fact that in the far future, which is hundreds of thousands of years in the future, humanity seemingly don't exist at all. I mentioned that this book sometimes feels a bit like a workplace drama, and I think that this is most evident in the middle of the book, where things did start to become a little bit dull, a little bit boring at times, where you have this element of political maneuvering and conspiratorial efforts between these different parties within Eternity. But this is a relatively short book. This edition comes in under 200 pages, and after you push through some of those less interesting sections in the middle, I think that Asimov does actually stick the landing with some really unexpected reveals and ideas that made it a worthwhile read. Amazingly, this is the first time that I've ever read anything by Isaac Asimov, and I must admit, I was a little bit apprehensive going in. I know that he's obviously one of the big three of the golden age of science fiction, alongside Robert A. Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke, but I have heard that he has a tendency to be a little bit dry and a little bit technical. But I'm pleased to say that I've got off to a really positive start with Asimov here. I think that The End of Eternity was a great introduction for me, and I got a really good impression of Isaac Asimov as a writer from it. Can you apply those criticisms that I just mentioned a minute ago to this book? Yes, I think that you can, but I do think that he does more with the prose, with the characters, and with the ideas than I was expecting when I was going into this. I do intend to read more Isaac Asimov, not only because he's such an important and influential figure in the history of the genre, but also because I've got off to this positive start with his work. So where should I go next with him? I know that a lot of people recommend the Foundation trilogy, so I should probably get around to that at some point. But if there are any other recommendations that you have for Isaac Asimov novels or short stories, please do let me know. The next book that I read recently is Time Out of Joint by Philip K. Dick, published in 1959, which follows a peculiar character named Rhaegal Gum, who is living with his sister and brother-in-law in an idyllic 1950s American town, making a living in a very unusual way. He is essentially spending his days obsessing over a regular competition run by a national newspaper, where you need to guess the location of a little green man in a grid of 1,000 squares, based on a series of cryptic clues. Rhaegal is so good at this competition that he wins it every single time, racking up a decent amount of prize money in place of a salary from a regular job. But this is PKD, and of course nothing is really as it seems, because Rhaegal begins to question his own reality. This is mostly because he is experiencing these episodes where items seem to dissolve from existence before his very eyes, leaving only a card of paper with the name of the object in its place, which is what you can see on the cover of this SF Masterworks edition. At the same time, his brother-in-law is questioning reality too, because early into the book, he goes into the bathroom in his house and he reaches for the cord for the light before discovering that there is no cord and that the light is actually controlled by a switch on the wall. This lapse in his belief or his memory leads him into some spiraling questions about why exactly he was so sure that there was a cord light in the bathroom rather than a switch. When he tells Rhaegal about this experience, he says that time is out of joint, which I believe is a quote from Hamlet, or it's Shakespeare at least, but I think it is Hamlet, which is where this book gets its title from. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the plot of this book because so much of the joy of this reading experience is unraveling the mysteries for yourself and determining whether time is in fact out of joint or whether these characters are experiencing some kind of psychosis. There was a point in this book that really reminded me of the film The Truman Show, to the point where I would be incredibly shocked if this book did not serve as an inspiration to the writer of that film. And that's not really a spoiler in any way, because at the point when that comparison started to creep into my mind, you're still not sure whether Regal's perspective on reality is reliable. This is my fourth PKD novel so far, and I think that he has a real knack for constructing a compelling narrative and for developing interesting and memorable characters. The book also moves at a really great pace, stringing you along with those questions and those mysteries, which all build to some great reveals toward the end. I obviously spoke about the comparison to The Truman Show, but I do get the sense that this is a really important novel in shaping these kind of reality-bending stories that have become so prominent today. In the version that I read, there is an afterword from Lou Stathis, which briefly goes into Philip K. Dick's publication history, his personal life, and his own struggles with psychosis. Reading this now and thinking about the paranoia and the uncertainty that the characters are feeling lends a bit of extra weight to the book when you consider the similar struggles that the author himself went through. When I hear people speak about PKD today, they often refer to him as mental or crazy. And yeah, I mean, I get it, but I don't know, it feels a bit reductive and it feels like a disrespectful way to speak about the troubled mind of a true visionary genius. The last book that I read in this time-related selection of books is Journey Beyond Tomorrow by Robert Sheckley, published in 1962, which is a satirical science fiction novel which is basically a future civilization in the South Pacific Islands, reading stories of a 21st century man called Jones, who has become this kind of legendary, almost prophetic figure to these island-dwelling people. And these stories are each told by a different scholar on a different one of these island nations. They follow Jones as he travels from one of these islands to the US, where he gets into all kinds of shenanigans involving various institutions, including the police and the prison system, the military, some political parties, and the government in general. And what Sheckley is doing here is really using this framing device to take a satirical look at these various systems, which are mostly absurd and dysfunctional in this book. I think that I've read one Robert Sheckley short story before, and I remember it being okay, but I hear so much about how Robert Sheckley is this hilarious writer, and I've heard that Journey Beyond Tomorrow is a funny book, and I didn't find this to be the case at all. In fact, I actually found myself getting very annoyed at this novel, which is both pretentious and satirical simultaneously, a combination which I found to be pretty insufferable, to be honest, and it's definitely the worst book out of these three recent reads. These books are all part of Science Fiction, the 100 Best Novels list by David Pringle, which I'm reading through on the channel, and I think that if I wasn't so committed to completing this challenge, I would have actually DNF'd this one. Despite this dud, the other two were good, enjoyable, and worthwhile reads, so I'm going to let Mr. Pringle off this time, especially considering that I have been on a pretty decent streak with books on this list. If you feel like following me along on my journey to complete this challenge, I think I'm at about 52 books out of 100, where at the end I'll do some kind of ranking video from worst to best. Feel free to hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, hit the comment section, and hit the like button. And if you've done all of that already, thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.